Does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for NBC Sports Philadelphia, and I wrote about a million articles in the last day and a half or so. Mr. Dave Zangaro, how are you today, Dave?
I'm doing well, caffeinated and ready to go for day two.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm reading like, wait, Dave wrote this one? What about this one? No, Dave wrote that one? And it was a late night with them going all the way to 31 like that, so, and the presser and all that. Let me ask you first about Jihaad Campbell. Let's put the injury thing to the side for a moment because that's kind of, uncontrollable at the moment. How good a football player do you think he can be if he hits his ceiling here in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, there really aren't questions about him as a football player. You know, you look at the consensus board, he was expected to go way higher. You look at rankings from every expert there is in terms of the draft, and then he was up there in the teens, early teens on some of them. So he's a really good player, super athletic, has an athletic body, big body, rangy player. He can do a lot of things off ball. He can do a lot of things as an edge rusher. He went to Alabama as an edge rusher. They move him off ball, and he ends up performing really well there. But clearly the Eagles think he has some potential as a pass rusher. I don't think they would be willing to trade up and be aggressive to trade up. Even before they moved up to 31, they were trying to get up for him earlier. I don't think they'd do that if he doesn't have the pass rush ability. So you put that all together, there's a lot to like about him. Of course, there's the medical, and it's tough to completely divorce it. If you're the Eagles, you have to trust your medical staff. You have to trust their evaluation, because if they're right about him, then, yeah, this could be a huge steal.
Dave, I'm looking at your top 20 or your 25 options for the Eagles on day two. In your opinion, where is the biggest area of need right now?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, if we're just going pure need without kind of handicapping it toward positional value, I mean, safety is a big need. They don't really have another starting safety, but I also think that's a position where they feel like they can probably fill it after the draft if it doesn't fall their way. I still think defensive tackle is a really big need for them, and I think there are a lot of players who will be available on day two who would make some sense for them. I really like Shamar Turner from Texas A&M, just a nasty three technique who definitely sometimes gets a little over the line, but I'd rather that than the other way, right? So I think he's a guy. TJ Sanders from South Carolina, another defensive tackle who would make some sense in their range. I think that's a position where we talked about how deep it was going into this draft. You start to see that depth when you're in day two and these players are available. In a weaker class, they might have already been gone. They might be going a lot earlier in the second round. So in terms of value and need, I think defensive tackle is a spot that I'm looking at.
The other one I want to ask you about is because so many fans are talking about it, because the Goddard thing has been hanging like a guillotine over some fans, like necks in a way, because we keep hearing about it. And when they asked him about it, like at the owners' meetings, they did not have any vote of confidence that he would be back. And then it's like, okay, well, if he's gone, what about the tight end position? Do you think that they may consider addressing that here on day two?
Yeah, it's possible. And it's a pretty decent tight end class, but I do think there's a definite drop-off after the names we're going to hear today. Mason Taylor's the one at the top of the list right now. He's considered the third best tight end in this class. There's a lot to like about him. Big body, great hands, some yak ability. I think he'd be a really solid pick. You'd probably have to move up for him, but I think you're okay with that. You know, you have those 3 fifth-round picks at your disposal. You have most likely 11, maybe 12 picks next year. So if there's a player on their board they want to go up and get, they can do that. But he's not the only tight end available on day two. You have Elijah Arroyo from Miami, kind of a different type of player. Doesn't offer you as much dual threat ability, but he's out there. Terrence Ferguson from Oregon would make a lot of sense. And then Harold Fannin Jr. is a name that has obviously been linked to the Eagles quite a bit. His head coach at Bowling Green, now the Eagles quarterbacks coach, Scott Loeffler. So a connection there. I don't know if he'd necessarily be the best fit, but you see how productive he was at the college level, and they have the guy who designed that offense in the building. It's pretty easy to make that connection. So, yeah, tight end, we'll see how it all falls, but I could certainly see them leaving with one.
Dave, I'm going to ask you to look into your DZ crystal ball here. We all know that Howie Roseman is unpredictable. How many picks, in your opinion, do you think the Eagles make tonight?
Oh, that's a good question. It might be tough to scrounge up another one, but this is where the strength of this draft is, right? I thought there was a chance that if things didn't fall their way last night, they would trade down and then trade up in this round and really try to maximize, that 35-40 to 55-ish window in this draft. It might be tough to get back in to this round. So I'm going to go with 2, but I do think they'll be moving around. I don't think they're going to draft at 64 and 96 where they currently sit.
I agree.
Yeah, see, that's pretty fascinating. We're speaking of Dave Zangaro, does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for NBC Sports Philadelphia. Also, looking at the offensive side of the ball, because obviously everything other than tight end, obviously, is there any other thing, like maybe not in day 2, but maybe day 3? Do you think there's some places where they may look for some guys? Obviously, they don't have a lot of room for starters, but maybe depth spots, place where they're a little thin on the offensive side of the ball, outside of tight end, maybe with some of those 5th-round picks?
Yeah, and look, I wouldn't completely rule out offensive line on day 2 either. If there's they have a type when it comes to offensive linemen, right? They like big bodies, they like athletes, and there are some of these prospects available. I think offensive line makes a lot of sense. They're always looking to replenish, and we're all looking at the right guard spot, but there's a need beyond that. There's a need to. They added Kendall Lamb, who, at his advanced age, maybe he's going to be a perfect swing tackle, but they're always thinking ahead when it comes to the offensive line. So there are some big body tackles who are worth developing in this draft who could maybe even slide inside if you need some more competition there. And then there are some kind of straight down the middle guards who, if it's the right player, I don't think they're completely against that either. We saw them draft one last year in the 5th round, so I think that's possible. They're always looking to add on the line, so I think that's possible. And then, look, once you get into the 5th round, could they draft a receiver? Sure. I mean, they didn't really have a huge need last year, but they went out and they drafted a couple on day 3. So I think if there's a toolsy type of player available, I wouldn't rule that out either.
Dave, you and I have talked about this before, but where do you land on Kelee Ringo and the cornerback position in this draft class?
Yeah, I like Kelee. I'm fascinated to see him play. I think bringing in Adoree Jackson makes sense because I don't think you just want to hand over that position to any young player who hasn't really earned it like that. So I think they can get by with Kelee Ringo. I think I'm maybe a little higher on him than some others, especially when you're talking about like those young players who might need to step up into bigger roles this year. I'm probably higher on Kelee than I am some of the others. And part of that is because I have seen him play in the league a little bit. I've seen some good things. I've seen some not so good things that he needs to clean up. But, they drafted Kelee Ringo because he was a super young, super talented cornerback who fell way farther than they expected. I'd be fascinated to see him play there. I don't think cornerback is a pressing need. It's a position where could they draft one if the value lines up? Yeah, absolutely. But that's not you could say that for pretty much just about every position. I don't think it's a huge need. I think they're in better shape with Kelee Ringo at corner than they are with some of those other young players at those positions where they lost players from last year.
So is that your way of saying that you're not 100%? And I'm not trying to be insulting. You're not 100% sold on Sidney Brown as a free safety.
Yeah, and it's part of it is because I haven't seen him do it. Right, like. Yeah. It's really tough. The evaluation of Sidney Brown to me is tougher than Kelee Ringo, even though they both played like somewhat significant snaps in the same season. Watching a safety and sometimes a nickel in Sidney Brown in that kind of disastrous defensive season is a lot harder to evaluate than Kelee Ringo playing outside corner. Right? To me, Kelee Ringo playing outside corner, it's not completely independent of scheme, obviously, but I think it's a lot easier to tell what's there and what isn't than Sidney Brown playing in a defense that was just really confused by the end of that 23 season, where it's like it's really tough for me to get much of an evaluation at all from that.
No, that's very fair. Well, Dave, I appreciate you fitting us in. I know it's a busy day, and everybody should go to NBC Sports Philadelphia. You, Ruben, have seemed like you've written at least 37 pieces since yesterday. But all great stuff. I got a bunch of them in front of me. Appreciate you coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, guys. Yep, take care.
All right, that was Dave Zangaro on the Comcast Business Hot. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate it. If you want more of this content, make sure you like and subscribe. And you know you can do that kind of over here if you want more of the best show ever.